Hi guys, my name is Josh. I am a member of YIMBY Action, and I am here to talk to you about how to deconstruct a housing element. These housing elements are updated every 8 years, and there are specific rules for these housing elements. And what I'm going to do during this session is go over some of the rules, go over how you as an activist can look at the different housing element, and you can deconstruct the housing element so you can see exactly what is basically bullshit and what's not. And from that, you could actually write a letter to HCD, and HCD will basically take your information that you say and confront the city about what you find. So I'll turn off this little light. I had that lit on, so I looked good for 2 seconds. Not sure that made any difference. So let's talk about a housing element. So I live in South Pasadena. I know this place well. I happen to get heavily involved in this because they proposed a lot of bullshit from the day one. And I watched it and I complained, and I realized that, okay, they don't care about my complaints. HCD cares about my complaints. So looking at the HCD website, this is the housing elements website for HCD. And if you go to the very bottom of it, you will see public comments. They really care about the public comments you give. And if you send in a public comment and it's a good public comment, they will actually confront the city and basically cut and paste your public comment into their report for what the city needs to prove. So we have this website here, housingelements.hcd.co. Whenever I review a housing element, I literally just pull up my email and I start writing the email and go over the, whenever I find something, I write it in my email, and then I look back in my email and finish writing the email, make it look nice. Frequently, I have all different fonts and stuff like that. So my emails at the start look like ransom letters, and then I change all the fonts so I make them look easy. So we're going to go over how to look at a housing element, how to find the BS, and how to write it up to HCD. Most of what we're doing is based on the sites. Now, a housing element has a couple of different components. One of it is it identifies the different plots of land that it considers viable housing sites. So here is maps from South Pasadena, and I'm pointing at the screen, the different things are viable housing sites. So it's housing element is two sites. The housing element is two parts, the sites and then different programs. Most of what we're covering is the sites, because if you know that a site doesn't work, it's easy to write a letter to HCD and say, hey, this site is illegal or doesn't work for this reason, and it should not be allowed. And HCD will basically put that in their spreadsheet and send it off. So this was the spreadsheet from South Pasadena. So you have the APM number here. I love how I'm pointing with my finger. You have the APM number here. And over here, you have the notes from HCD. A lot of these notes were essentially my comments to them. For example, there was a community garden on there. This was my comments. I commented how there's a pavilions that had that was undergoing a renovation, and it was included. So HCD takes your notes from these sites and directly confronts the cities about them. The second part is the actions that the city will take to produce housing. That is a lot more complex, and I'll get into that at the end. But for the most part, most people could look at their local neighborhood, look at what the city says, hey, this could be housing, and most people could actually figure out, hey, this is BS. Now, I will start with one non-site related thing. Every single city is trying to claim, let's make this zoom in. Every single city is trying to claim ADUs. So this is the city of Newport Beach. Now, you're allowed to claim that you will create a certain amount of ADUs over the next 8 years. That number must be the baseline of what you can claim is your average from 2018, 2019, and 2020. If you have 10 in 2018, 15 in 2019, 20 in 2020, you're allowed to claim 15 and they won't ask any questions. In order to claim above that, you have to implement significant policies. Now, most places are not implementing significant policies. They're just trying to claim some completely made up number that's not actually based. So that's where I always start. I do a Control F, I search ADU, and you'll see this toolbar over here. Most of the stuff the first 50% of all housing elements are stuff you don't care about. You really have to get down to like halfway down until you actually get there. So it's like talking about ADUs, residential care. You have to get down to a chart. See, this is every time they say ADU, mostly doesn't matter. You will find a chart of their policy actions, ADU monitor, ADU. Here's the chart. So, hi Jackson. This is my son Jackson. Cuteness break. I know you can't see him, but this is my son Jackson. Okay, I'm recording now. So this is the chart you want. This is a lot more credit. This is a lot more complicated than most charts would be, but you're looking for the ADU numbers. So every single city will try to claim ADU numbers. Now, Newport Beach is claiming 334 ADU numbers. Over 8 years, that corresponds to 42 ADU numbers each. Now, sometimes they actually list the ADUs right here. So let's see, where is it? ADUs, very low, ADU. Slash site, airport. Here we go. So they're claiming 40 ADUs. Sometimes they are really good about it, and they say that they actually list the data you're looking for. City is claiming 21 ADUs from January 1st to December 30th. That is exactly the information of what you're allowed to do. So they say 21s, and if you go down, let's see, they're complaining twice the they're claiming twice the number of ADUs as they're actually producing. This is not allowed without significant programs saying like, hey, we're going to fund ADUs. Hey, we have plans for ADUs. Hey, we allow pre-made ADUs. This kind of thing is not allowed. So this is where I always start, and I write a letter saying, hey, they're only producing 20 ADUs per year. They're claiming 40 ADUs per year. This should not be allowed. That's where I always start. Then at the bottom of every housing element, there are maps. Now you want to look for the big map. They have maps of all the little sites. Then they have lists, like extensive lists of all the sites. Scroll. Where's the map? All right, I can't find it on Newport. I will go to South Pasadena since that's what I have up. South Pasadena. This is a map of South Pasadena. There are two different sites, two different income levels. There's above moderate and low income. Above moderate has less rules than low income. Low income sites, they have to break those out and talk about them. And there's a lot more rules about low income sites. We'll get to that in a bit. But to start, what you want to do is you want to look at every map for a housing element and just say, hey, is there something that seems screwy? You know, sometimes you'll see clusters of sites. Sometimes you'll see sites like you see this little yellow thing. That's a thin line. Something is off about that site. Sometimes you'll look and you say, hey, here's another thin strip. Sometimes you'll look and you say, hey, this is in the middle of a block. And sometimes you actually live in the neighborhood and you know this street. And it's like, hey, I walk down this area. This has power lines through here. So you want to glance at sites. Now, when you look at South Pasadena, you know, you look at something like this. This one doesn't tell you much. It's like, okay, Main Strip, yeah, a lot of buildings, nothing that interesting. But when you look down here, like, wait a second, something strange is going on there. And then you pull up a map of South Pasadena and you see they are claiming a whole bunch of land on a place that has absolutely no roads. So for moderate income sites, this is not allowed. Like every one of these, these are not allowed. You have to have a road. Now the city could say, okay, yeah, we're building a road next year. But they actually have to have a concrete plan in order for HC to actually allow these things. So what you want to do is, if you see something like this, write it down. If you see like a little strip of land here, get a picture and say, this is a strip of land that South Pasadena is claiming to be a home. Or in this case, you see this strips of land here, right here. That is a valley somewhere right about here. They say these are 15 homes. So it appears that cities have used some computer program, and the computer program just pulls out any place that doesn't have a building on it or a building that's old and claims this will be a home. So you'll frequently see backyards, like somewhere in here is some guy's tennis courts and some guy's pool. So you want to get about 10 different examples of this. Like this is some guy's playground. These are in the middle of a block. And I found that going over to Redfin actually has great maps for this kind of thing. So I actually go on my phone, I pull up my phone, and I use Redfin to take screenshots. They're claiming this is a home. I use Redfin to take a screenshot of that. And they're claiming these two right here. They're claiming somewhere in here. Redfin will actually have these lines mapped out, so you could take a screenshot on your phone and Redfin and just send it over to yourself to take the pictures. So I always do that for moderate sites. Now you'll also have that list of moderate sites. So this is a list of all the moderate sites. You could see it because it says moderate income capacity. Now, what I always look at is the parcel size. If you see something small, there is something wrong with that site. And you know that whatever consultant is doing this housing element, they are bullshitting, because there is no way you could build a home on what is 0.3. That's like 2,000 square feet, Monterey at Arroyo Verde. So the way you look at some of these sites, after you just glance at the map, is for all areas, in order to find a site, you have to do Los Angeles County APN map. These numbers are called APNs. So you do that, it'll give you a map, cut, and then go over to the map, find by assessor ID. That's the same thing as APN. Type that in, zoom, zoom, zoom. Oh, it didn't zoom in. Normally it zooms in for you, but it'll zoom into the, maybe it's not listed. Let's try a different one. I think it has problems because that was the area of South Pasadena that had no streets. Oh, well, normally it brings you to that exact spot, but not this time because it says address not available. So that's what you want to do with moderate sites. We'll come back to that. Low-income sites, they will actually break it down for you. And low-income sites, there's specific rules of what's allowed for a low-income sites. Low-income sites, in order to be a low-income site, there's a couple of rules. One, it has to be greater than 0.5 acres. Two, it has to be less than 10 acres. The reason is most low-income housing projects is between 100 units and about 400 units. So if something's too small, low incomes don't pencil out. If something's too big, it doesn't get broken up to a size that low incomes can use. So those are two of the things you want to look at. You also want to see, does the low income site have a probability of being turned over into housing in the next 8 years? And also you want to check who owns the low income site and if it's a realistic site. So we're just going to run through some of the South Pasadena low income sites. Now they all have maps. They will all say their size. They will say how many, the density, and what the realistic capacity is. We're going to come back to these calculations. That's one of the more complex things, but we'll come back to that. So this is a vacant lot. Vacant lots, there's almost no rules for low income. You could count them. This is a business park. Business park, 2.23 acres, 50 Hounsfeld units. I live here. I know this business park is kind of a decent business. So what I always do I just do a quick search for LoopNet, and I know the exact location of this. This is that business park, and that business park has listings for lease. If they have listings for lease, they are not allowed to actually be included. And it calls itself a completely self-managed, well-maintained business park. So South Pasadena says this will be 70 units, but the owner says it will be something else. So you would copy this down, you would include a link to the LoopNet, and you'd say, this is not a realistic thing. Now, cities also have to have responses from owners. You'll note a lot of places don't have responses from owners. We'll come back from that. This is another similar business park that also has a listing on LoopNet. So you copy that down. So you basically just want to look at each one. And for a lot of them, I actually drop down on Google Maps and look at. I won't for this one, because I look at Google Maps and I say, hey, okay, this is the Arroyo Vista Inn. It wants to become housing. Here is the Arroyo Vista Inn. But there is actually a building right here that has a driveway that uses Arroyo Vista. So I wrote down, hey, this building does not have access if this is redeveloped. So this is not a viable site because of that reason. Now they could claim lower than what they're claiming, but that's a way to prove that site's not viable. In this case, it's the Trader Joe's. So I always, like I said, I know South Pasadena, so I don't have to. One way you could tell if a business might not be viable, you look at Trader Joe's here, look at Trader Joe's here, you see a ton of cars in the parking lot. And if you don't live in the area, do a drop down, look it up. You see tons of cars, tons of people. You want to write this down and say, hey, this is not a viable source because it has a business that's a very well-used business. This is not going to be a business that will actually turn over. Now, a lot of cities are just saying every grocery store will become housing. And you need to make sure to mention that. If you have time, get a picture of this. Going to the next one, we'll go down to this one. A lot of cities are claiming their city halls, their police departments, yada, yada, yada. So this is the fire department of South Pasadena. This is the police department. This is their city hall. This is their offices. They're trying to claim all of this will be torn down and turned into housing. For the most part, HCD is on top of this and says you cannot do this unless you have an actual plan. You want to check and be sure that other city-owned properties are not included without a significant plan. So South Pasadena they have a public works yard where they store all of their homes. And so the city might not know that this is a public property, which is used a lot, but that's something that you would know if you happen to live in the area. So you want to just keep going through these. Here's another example of a way that they're claiming BS. South Pasadena claims this parking lot right here. Now, this parking lot is city-owned. It's not actually associated with business. This parking lot is city-owned, not associated with business. This parking lot is owned by Rite Aid, and it is the main parking lot for Rite Aid. Like if you park there, this is where you park to go to that Rite Aid. So whenever you have a parking lot, you want to look and see, hey, is this associated with any business? And you don't actually have to prove, hey, it's associated with Rite Aid. You could just say, hey, all of these businesses depend on that parking lot in order for their customers, and that parking lot is not a viable answer. So other examples is this parking lot right here. It's used by all of these businesses here. So, a lot of cities will just claim parking lots for their low incomes, and it has to be a parking lot that you could be like, okay, yes, this is viable. Like if you happen to know a McDonald's and you go into the McDonald's, this is one of the nicest McDonald's ever. It's brand new, recently renovated. This is why I actually dropped in on Google Maps on all the low income sites. I take a physical look at it to be sure that, hey, this looks fine. Because there's been times where I found buildings undergoing renovations in 2019. And I'm like, okay, this is not a viable building. If they just paid thousands of dollars to renovate it, millions of dollars to renovate it, they're not going to turn over into houses. And I'll show you the last one. So South Pasadena claims all of their grocery stores. The last low-income example I'll use is sometimes they will claim single-family homes will turn into housing. South Pasadena says this one, and this one, all owned by YMCA will be turned into housing. These cannot legally be torn down by South Pasadena rules. So, whenever you see a single family home that will be turned into housing, you want to comment and say, hey, this might not be a viable site. So that's basically what you do for low income sites. You want to, you want to see if they're joining low income sites that should not be joined. The sites have to be over 0.5 acres. This is 0.56. Okay, that is great. It's legal. But what it turns out is these are two different properties with two different owners. They cannot do that unless they have written proof from the two owners that they're planning on selling to each other. In this case, the city owns one and the property owns, and a private property owner owns the second one. So no response from a property owner or the non-city owned. So this is actually two sites that are less than 5 acres. So you should write down that, hey, these are two sites. They're not the same owner. It's less than 5 acres. This should not be allowed. Here's a site that's 0.042 acres claimed for low income. This is not allowed. Now, the only way it is allowed if the city can point to other sites in the city that low-income property, low-income housing has been developed on sites that low. For example, Oxnard actually has good examples of this. South Pasadena has never developed a low-income site in its history, so they're not able to claim this kind of site. So you want to look to be sure that, hey, they're not doing lot consolidations where it's like, oh, here are 5 different owners and they're going to join together. So this is the main example from South Pasadena. A lot of other places do that. So let's talk about some of the requirements that they have to do for analysis of the sites. Now, this is the second part. So we're going to go to the schoolyard site for South Pasadena. This is one of the main streets of South Pasadena. This is our subway station. This is a parking lot with a historic school. This is like one of the first historic schools in the history of South Pasadena. That is this lot right here. Now, 2 acres, 40 units per acre, they're claiming 70 units. So for every site, the city must do 2 things. Now, this is a little bit more advanced. You might not want to get down this rabbit hole, but this is another way that you could actually make cities actually follow the rules. They have to do 2 things: 2 analysis of every single site. They cannot just claim, hey, we have 2 acres here, is 40 acres per unit. We could claim 80 units. They are not allowed to just claim the maximal density. They have to do 2 things. They have to show, 1, what is the developable land if residential housing will be built? And 2, what are the chances that residential housing will be built? So those are 2 different factors that must be multiplied. So let's say 80% of the land is usable and there's a 50-50 chance it will be developed in the planning period. If you could build 100 maximum units, they don't get to claim 100 maximum units. They get to claim, hey, 80% of the land is usable, so they could claim 80 units, but only 50% chance that it will be built in this planning period, so they're only allowed to claim 40 units. So I'm going to come back to those 2, but I'm going to talk about the buildable area first. So you want to, if you have time, you want to glance at the different areas and say, hey, what is the buildable area? So I know this area. This is a historic school district, school building. If you drop down, you could see, hey, this is a nice old building. It's likely historic. So South Pasadena is claiming about a 90% capacity. This building can never be torn down. And most cities will never tear down their historic buildings. So only this part is actually buildable. So you want to say, hey, they're claiming this, but they did not do the environmental analysis. It looks like only 60% of the land is buildable, and they probably have open space requirements that make it 40% buildable. So that is something you want to actually write down. If you have the time, write down and state. Now, the other example is the Arroyo Vista Inn that I showed you before. if it's on a steep slope or something like that, like this one, this is not fully buildable. There's a lot of this land that cannot be built. So you want to write that down. If they're trying to claim everything will be built, you want to write down, hey, they did not do the environmental analysis. Now, that is part one of the analysis they are required to do. How much of the land is buildable? So take this pavilions here. You could easily tear down everything and build everything. So the environmental factors of how much of the land is buildable, if it is going to be built, doesn't really apply to pavilions, doesn't really apply to grocery stores. What does apply to grocery stores is the likelihood that a store will be turned over and turned into housing. So for low-income sites, you have to have substantial evidence. That is a legal term. Substantial evidence that the current use will be discontinued in the next 8 years. And a lot of cities are just completely ignoring this, and they are completely ignoring the probability factor that something will be turned over into housing. So that is something I want to comment on. Not just, hey, is the land good for housing? What are the chances the current use will be discontinued? And so that's what I was talking about. Hey, if you see a busy business, you need to write that down and say, hey, this is a busy business. This is not going to be discontinued. This is an example of a bonds and a pavilions right next to each other. They're owned by the same place. This place is actually pretty trashed. If the city said, hey, we have substantial evidence because we have a grocery store right next door. This is an old building. There is a decent chance. That is an acceptable statement from the city. And you could say, okay, this one has a chance. So this one, you could say 100% chance or 80% chance, or you could say 50% here, 50% here. South Pasadena claims 4 grocery stores, and they're claiming all of them will turn over. A lot of places will claim every grocery store and say all of them will turn over. What they can say is, hey, we think one of the 4 will turn over. So multiply 25% of the maximum density for all 4. They cannot say all 4 will turn over. So that's something important to look at. And that's basically the essence of ground truthing. If you could look at a business and say, hey, this business is not going to turn over, and you could provide evidence, HCD will say, hey, we do not believe this. So this is one of the grocery stores. This is Ralph's, completely full parking lot. And if you drop in, well, this is actually not that good a day for Ralph's. That's not a better day. But you could look at it and say, hey, this is a good looking Ralph's. This is not going to be torn down. So that is the essence of ground truthing. And that is the kind of on the ground knowledge that the HCD doesn't have the manpower to do. So if you do this for them and you provide them a sheet saying, hey, these are the sites and this is why, HCD will take that information and, they'll consider their job done. So let me show you an example of a letter I have written. So Oxnard housing element. This was a very short one. So this is the part where I talk about, hey, they have to calculate both the usable land and the chance that something will be turned into land. Most consultants are not calculating the chance, so I wrote that there. Then I looked down, I dropped down to the sites and said, okay, these are viable businesses. When I looked at the map for Oxnard, they had a circle of sites right here. And I saw, okay, this is strange. And so Oxnard basically says their entire downtown will be turned into housing. That's what Oxnard says. So I looked at Oxnard, I went downtown, I'm like, okay, they're claiming a viable business will be turned into 2 units. They're claiming each of these buildings were turned into 7 units. So I wrote it up and said, hey, this is an example of an entire place where they're just claiming all these housing units and housing in a place that housing has never been built and never will be built. This was a very short, well, this wasn't short for me. Then I went down to the Oxnard housing element and went to their low income sites and I did the exact same thing where I looked at their different sites. I dropped down, I listed them by the way Oxnard listed them. And I basically looked at them and said, top part was sold for development, bottom 2 is a functioning Mitsubishi dealership. And, I basically looked at all of them and I wrote down, as I looked at them, I wrote down and I would Google the places. And I sent this email off to HCD, and HCD basically took all these things and put it into their spreadsheet. They used the things I used for Oxnard, and they basically confronted Oxnard on it. So this is the basis of ground truthing. If you're really in depth and you really know, you could start looking at the programs and seeing if the programs they're claiming would actually do anything. For example, South Pasadena says parcelage assemblage is one of the programs they'll do. And if you look at it, they basically say, hey, we will ask people nicely to assemble their parcels. So a lot of their programs are BS. I personally don't think you guys should waste your time on this. I would move to the next city. Pick a city where they have a NIMBY city council person or someone on livable California, and do everything you can for that city. Look up every single one of these. And you could complain about every single one of them for a city like Cupertino or someplace like that, South Pasadena, Beverly Hills, Torrance, all the places with the most NIMBY people. Your time would be better spent looking at all these little things than that. So Jess should have links to some of my letters of what I've written up. So that's basically the end of this. What I'll do now is I'm going to pick a random city, and I'm just going to basically do it and talk out loud. Pull up my map. We're going to Laguna Beach. And I'd pull up an email here, and I'd actually pull up, and I'd start writing this stuff down. So I search for the ADU. So 2018 to 2019, the city received 3 ADU applications. In 2019, they received 40 ADU applications. So they are at 43. They could claim legally 43 divided by 3, 12. They assume 15. To be honest, this isn't that bad. I honestly wouldn't write it if they're at 12 and they're claiming 15. So they are within limits. Now go down, look for the map, Really? That is amazing. Okay. Sometimes they have really crappy maps. So they're claiming the Pine Castle will be redeveloped. Oh, it's a current project. So if they're a current project, then that means it's actually will be done. The Pine Castle is being redeveloped. That is shocking. Okay. But this is this yellow site. They're claiming this strip of land. The Pottery Barn and these homes will be turned into housing. Newton, drop in. I mean, I have no idea why they would just pick that one, but that's one of their claims. So, I mean, I would write down, hey, these are active businesses. That's not allowed. So let's see, coming down here. They're claiming a church, neighborhood congregational church. This is like the crappiest housing element ever because they're claiming almost nothing. I wonder what their RHNA number is. This is amazing. Laguna has only 5 sites that they're claiming will be turned into housing. This is the smallest I've ever seen. Let's see. So we have that, there, Pirate Tower, Hook. So they're claiming, here's this, that. So they're claiming another church, Orange County Healthcare Agency. Yeah, they're claiming the Orange Care Healthcare Agency. And last and least, they are claiming the parking lot of, no, they're claiming this mountain up here. So they're claiming this mountain will be houses. Is that really it for Laguna? That's amazing. I've never seen a housing element in all my times that is that low. Let's see what that current project is. 12 units on a, oh, existing. 13 additional condos, 4 low income. Expected projects. All right, that's interesting. So let's scroll down. Housing element sites. They really only have to do 446. That's amazing. That explains why they're not doing anything. So, I mean, I would write a small letter for this one, but this is pretty self-explanatory. They're not even doing anything else. I'll show you another one. La Mesa. This was another interesting one. So La Mesa, who has a great city councilman. This one shocked me. I was shocked by what this one had. The ADUs weren't a problem, but you go down to the map And if you look at this map, you can say, hey, these are a bunch of clusters of sites. What is going on with these clusters? And if you look, La Mesa is claiming all of their low-income sites on a very popular mall and adjacent apartments. Hobby Lobby, Ross, Macy's, Target, Walmart, Grossmont. That is most of their low-income sites. And they are also claiming their, right here, they're claiming their post office, police department bonds. So this is an example of, okay, this is, you look at the map and you can say, okay, this is screwed up. But they also have a bunch of moderate sites. And like, if you look at these, tiny, tiny, tiny. And what's funny is sometimes they're like, they actually list, I actually read these quickly. So vacant, 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 trailer, driveway, vacant, backyard, driveway, backyard / pool. So, I mean, they're claiming housing units will be built on this. And it's just the most amazing thing ever. So let's see. So realistic capacity is this one. So like they're claiming 1.68 houses will be built on this backyard pool. And this driveway will have 1.49 houses. I mean, you don't even have to do the APM numbers. San Diego has horrible APM numbers. They're claiming 0.5 houses will be built on a fence / side yard. So, I mean, this is all complete bullshit. Landscape parking lot, 2.74 houses. Miscellaneous structures, 3.5 houses. You know, this is all the kind of stuff that's not allowed. And they just ran through a program and said, hey, what do we have this old? Okay, let's list them all. And, you know, it's just amazing that they actually, you know, just had stuff that's like, okay. So, you know, if you have more time, you want to go to the San Diego APM site and look them up. The San Diego APM site is not as good as Los Angeles APM sites. But, you know, this is the kind of thing that you just want to glance at. Hey, what's the smallest one I could find? 009, let's look at it. Okay, this is BS. So, and in this case, they're saying it's lot consolidation. So they're saying that these lots will be consolidated. So I have another letter that goes through a lot of the things as sample letters. So this is how I do it. Well, you know, that's about it. You know, I mean, I could go over so many more housing elements, but this is what I do when I'm bored. Just pull up a random housing element of a city I hate. Imperial Beach was interesting. So you go to their map, they did the exact same thing where it's like, oh, 0.61, this will be 2 housing units. And they're like 2 family detached. You know, they actually, if you just look at this, there's like no chance that any of these will turn over. And HCD actually approved this housing element. Like Imperial Beach, they have all these scattered homes. So like they have all these scattered greenhouses everywhere, and you just look at them. There's nothing in this area right here. There's nothing in here. They say, hey, those are empty lots. Hey, those are torn down houses. You know, you look at this and it's like, hey, that's just a normal neighborhood. And they're saying every one of these homes will be turned over into 2 to 3 homes. And that's just not a viable thing. And these orange sites are the low income housing. So, you know, once you figure out the map, look at the orange sites and it's like, okay, you know, let's see. What do we have here? Drop down. You look at this is a brand new house. This is a brand new house. According to Imperial Beach, this is 9 low-income housing units. These are all low-income housing units. You know, you can make a great case, but every one of these sites has less than 0.5 acres and should have been disallowed. But, you know, I mean, you just glance at the map and you can see, hey, okay, some of these are like, okay, I can believe these will be turned over. But this is how I look through different housing elements. This is how I deconstruct them. And, you know, if you just find all these bullshit sites, this is the kind of work that HCD does not have the manpower to do, which we could do. And HCD will take this information and run with it. And it can make a huge difference because a lot of these cities are just trying to claim places that will never be turned into housing. That's all I got.